enclosed body of an unidentified African-American woman was found in a wooded area.
We have another victim.
She had sustained numerous stab wounds.
The body was placed under a dead end sign.
The victim had been decapitated.
She did not deserve that.
We had so many unsolved homicides of women.
These cases were very likely connected.
No one knew who was committing these murders.
The atmosphere changed to one of fear.
We had never experienced anything like that down here.
It was very scary for a female at that time.
We knew we had a serial killer.
Yeah, Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana. It's right on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's a good town.
Growing up, for me, you were able to leave your doors open, go out and play at night. Everybody knew everyone, and they looked out for a lot of people.
In March of 1994, my office homicide was called. We had a deceased person. Her name was Ann Bryant. This elderly white female in her bedroom had sustained numerous stab wounds, and she was almost decapitated.
Ben Odom was the lead investigator at the time of my mother's death, and he promised me, he says, if I can ever solve it, I will, but he just was never able to.
I was getting off work. I was on the way to my house when the call came in. So I went to the crime scene and I pulled up, saw the body of an unidentified black female who was later determined to be Katherine Hall. The body was placed under a dead end sign. It was apparent that it had been placed there and making the sign part of the scene, if you will.
She had numerous lacerations to her body. She had basically been strangled by a long twist tie that a noose was made of, and she died of asphyxiation.
In Katherine Hall's mouth, there was found a pubic hair, and what made that hair very unique was that it had a root attached to it. The presence of a root on a hair allows us to do full DNA.
That DNA profile was ran through CODIS, which is a database that is used to compare DNA of known offenders against DNA of potentially unknown offenders. But there were no matches.
Artie Schmidt was a woman who was found in June of 1999. She was reported missing while jogging from an upper middle class neighborhood here in Baton Rouge. Her remains were discovered in a body of water in St. James Parish, nude.
In looking at these cases, investigators were working them as individual homicides. They had not been connected.
The detectives who were working the case ran out of leads, didn't have anything else to go on, so the case was considered a cold case, and it, like others, would be put in a file until further information came along.
In January of 2000, the skeletal remains were recovered of a victim who we now know as Joyce Williams. Based on the review at the forensics lab, you could see what appeared to be some type of sawing mark on one of the femurs of the victim.
These women were killed in a lot of different manners. It made it hard to tie them all together. So we were doing everything we could to figure out what was going on in Baton Rouge.
Between 1990s and 2000, no one knew who was committing these acts, these murders. We always suspect that possibly there was more than one person committed those acts. we didn't know. And so it was panic in Baton Rouge.
The atmosphere changed to one of fear. Women going to gun stores, buying guns, learning how to use a gun.
I purchased mace. You know, it was at the point of you have to protect yourself.
We had never experienced anything like that down here. I was worried about my mom.
Every time you looked on the news, there was always someone found dead.
The public tension was very high. It filled the news, and the pressure was on law enforcement.
The chief of police would hold daily press conferences because there was a necessity of answering the public's fear, but you needed to have somebody saying, we're working very hard, this is where we are, be careful, be careful.
We did everything that we could do, and we did run out of suspects. It's the worst feeling that you can get as a detective.
The new decomposed body of an unidentified African-American woman was found off Pride Port Hudson Road. Authorities believe she was suffocated.
Johnnie Mae Williams' remains were located in a wooded area in the northern part of our parish. You can see that there was ligature marks. Both of her hands had been severed at the wrist.
I didn't believe it at first. It was hard, and I can remember screaming.
It takes a evil spirit to cut somebody's fingers off or try to disfigure that person. Why would you want to do that? It was not a pleasant time.
How could someone hurt someone in such a manner and leave her there? That was despicable. She did not deserve that at all.
She went to nursing school, straight A student, came home every day with honors. My mom instilled strength and wisdom in me. And I feel like I wouldn't have been the strongest woman as I am if she wasn't there to teach me those things.
The damage that was done to her was very significant to me, especially the amputation of her hands. Post-mortem mutilation was what was important to the offender, and not the homicide.
There was a hair that was recovered from one of her wrist area where her hand had been severed. You know, as an investigator, when you have that hair stem, you know that hopefully that you might be able to extract a DNA profile from that, which will be able to be compared to a suspect, you know, at a later date.
My mother, Donna, she had 5 kids. I just always knew, no matter where, no matter what was going on, you know, she always had my back. I recall it was a Friday after the Mardi Gras, and I heard my phone ringing, picked up the phone, "Hey, Dad, what's up?" And on the other line, I could hear him crying in the background. And that's when, you know, words I'll never forget. And he just said, "They found your mama dead this morning." From that, I mean, my whole world went silent.
About 4 months after the discovery of Johnnie Mae Williams' body in North Baton Rouge, Donna Bennett Johnston's body was discovered in a canal near LSU in South Baton Rouge.
She was face down nude. Donna Bennett Johnston's left arm had been severed at her elbow. She had very visible ligature marks.
Her case was very likely connected to Johnnie Mae's case because it is such an unusual injury pattern, and you don't find dismemberment that often. Those are rare cases.
The Baton Rouge City Police Chief and the State Police, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI all pulled their resources together to form a task force to figure out who was responsible for these murders.
Very shortly after the discovery of Donna Bennett Johnston's body, I was assigned to work with this task force. When you see such significant postmortem cuttings, you realize you're dealing with a different breed here.
The amputation of the hands could be part of the sexual arousal of the offender. These paraphilic behaviors are recurrent urges to go out and to do it again and again.
We were looking at every unsolved homicide case to find a connection to the cases of Johnnie Mae and Donna Johnston.
We had this woman who was killed over 5 years ago, Katherine Hall, who also had these very similar ligature cable tie marks on her neck. We had DNA samples from her. Also, there was a DNA sample from the fingernail scrapings of Donna Bennett Johnston. So they were able to run the DNA from the Donna Bennett Johnston killing and run the DNA from the Katherine Hall killing, and lo and behold, it was a perfect match.
Also, the FBI lab came back with a DNA match from the hair found on Katherine Hall and the hair found on Johnnie Mae Williams. So we had the same offender's DNA present at all 3 crime scenes.
We knew we had a person who had committed all 3 of these killings by DNA, by the ritualistic stabbing, by the ligature that was used. This was a unique person as well, not only a killer, but a very unique serial killer.
Once the 3 different crime scenes were linked to the same offender through DNA analysis, we knew we had a serial killer.
They came in and, formed the task force to try to figure out what had happened, what was going on, and bring the killer to justice.
We took that DNA profile, ran it in all the accessible law enforcement databases, and unfortunately did not get a positive result.
How are we going to identify him? Now we have his profile, but he's not in a CODIS databank. So where are we going next?
From the Donna Bennett Johnston crime scene, the sheriff's office found a tire mark impression. So we thought that they were potentially tire marks from the offender's vehicle. We learned that it was a Goodyear Aquatred 2 tire.
The tire track was critical because I was convinced that this tire may lead to something, and everybody in the community was afraid. So we needed to catch the guy that was doing this as soon as possible.
The task force came up with a list of 90 people that had purchased the Goodyear Aquatred tires. These 90 people were divided up amongst the investigators. Each investigator was given a list of people. That investigator went out, canvassed his list, asked for a voluntary DNA swab. Then we were hoping that out of this pool of samples we had obtained to come up with a match to the 3 homicides we had tied together.
I had him actually on my ass every day about how many of these tire things have you found, how many people you found. That was his thing, these tire leads.
I had a list of about 10 names. My job was to go interview them, to ask them the questionnaire, and to get a swab of their DNA. On the morning of the 28th, we went to meet with Vincent Gillis. We walked up to his door, and we walked past the car, and on the car I looked down and I could see the Goodyear Aquatred tires were on the car. Mr. Gillis was in the backyard. We talked about the location where Miss Johnston's body was located. Mr. Gillis tells me that he had been in that area. And then I asked Vincent Gillis if he knew Johnnie Mae Williams. He told me he did know her.
You're knocking on the door because their tracks were at the scene of one homicide, and they just happened to know the victim of the other homicide that we already proved were committed by the same person. That was big.
I realized we need to get the DNA there pretty quick, and he volunteered to give us a DNA swab.
We knew we were looking at probably at least an 8-hour time frame before we would get any kind of results. But this is more than circumstantial that he would make those statements and have those tires. I said, we need to do an interview with him as soon as possible.
And we invited him to come down, and he agreed.
Sean, Vincent Gillis, and I were together for about 9 years, and I felt safe with him. When the police started taking Sean downtown, I couldn't fathom why. He just said they wanted to talk to him. I figured, well, he said he'll tell me what's going on when he gets home. I'll wait till he gets home.
Hey, Sean. Hey. Look, buddy. We're doing homicide investigations. Our strategy was to ask him for an explanation of how he knew one of our victims. He was pretty easygoing. He wasn't. If he was very nervous, he didn't show it. He masked it pretty well. It's my understanding that you were familiar with Johnnie Mae.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Mr. Gillis was not under arrest when he came down to the sheriff's office. He was free to go.
The goal is to keep him talking until the crime lab evidence comes back.
How did you know Johnnie Mae Williams? When I first met her, it was as a house cleaner.
We were trying to make him as at ease as possible. We didn't want to push him too hard because if he demanded to go home, we would have to let him go. And all the time we knew the DNA lab, they're working feverishly to try to come up with a match. We have tried to find anybody that had any information on her.
No, I couldn't think of any enemies. That's why when I heard that it was her, I'm like, God, who could do this?
At the point where Sean started defending Johnnie Mae, we felt like it was time to move on and maybe try to talk about Donna Bennett Johnston, how he had stated he had been at the crime scene. The other thing we wanted to talk about, when's the last time you were ever around that field? We're talking about where she was found.
That was about the weekend before the incident.
What happened?
Found. I had some beer, needed to go to the bathroom real bad, and knew I wasn't going to make it to the house, and so I just went to go pee. I was just going back there, pull up there. I was just going to stop at the gate, but the gate was like busted open, so I'm like, okay.
Oh, it was already up?
Pulled in, yeah. Okay.
His explanation really didn't make a whole lot of sense to us. His residence is probably a half a mile, 3/4 mile from the crime scene, so he could not drive another half a mile to his house. He felt the need to stop right there on the side of the road. Okay, wait, this is a bunch of bull.
Can you understand why we would want to question you about this?
Yes, I can.
If you were in our position, would you want to question?
If I were in your position and I did, I'd be lax not doing it. I'm just saying, I'm not your guy. I'm really not.
Okay. We really ramped up our urgency at that point because he was free to go at any time he wanted to, but we felt like we needed to keep him there as long as possible until the DNA evidence comes back. Everyone just had such a gut feeling that this is the guy. If he was a serial killer, you knew he was going to kill again. So the sense of urgency came from catching him before he killed again.
Sean Gillis provided a DNA sample, and that was being tested. It takes the State Police Crime Lab a while to do all the analysis. We knew eventually we were going to get a response back from the lab on whether or not it matched our offender's profile or didn't.
We needed to keep him there as long as possible until the DNA evidence comes back.
You had to go to the bathroom. Yeah. I had a few beers, and all of a sudden my bladder was just like,
I mean, it'd be quicker for you to go to the bathroom to your house than to go out here.
No, it wouldn't have been.
In investigating the murder of Donna Bennett Johnston, we were able to obtain a very unique set of tire tracks from the scene. So we had our list of roughly 90 people in the Baton Rouge area that had purchased the AquaTread tire. And that's what led us to Sean Vincent Gillis' house. At his house, he stated that he had been at the crime scene where Donna Bennett Johnston's body was found. And he also stated that he was familiar with and friends with one of our other victims, Johnnie Mae Williams.
From those tracks, it appears she was
unloaded from that vehicle and thrown into that canal.
It was not unloaded from my vehicle.
We didn't want to push him too hard because he was free to go at any time he wanted.
I appreciate your cooperation, I really did. You've been very cooperative.
But towards the end of the interview, it's common. You'll have another investigator come in and maybe approach it from a different angle. He may hit some nerves that you were not able to. So when I stepped out of the room, Max Sheely, who was actually the task force leader, stepped in and continued with the interview.
How you doing?
John Gillis.
Max Sheely. John, do me a favor, put that down.
Smoker.
I'm a reform smoker. That's the worst kind of
That is, believe me.
My goal when I go into a room is to try to be somebody that this person would take advice from, and then advise them to tell the truth. I don't like a barrier or a table or anything between me and who I'm talking to, so I moved the table when I walked in the room so we could have a conversation.
You're here apparently because your tires or your car was seen on Ben Hur around the same time this
We're here because the weekend before this poor woman was killed and dumped there, my car had been there.
The weekend before?
He insisted that his car had been there at the scene of the Donna Johnson homicide a week before that homicide. Well, there was several inches of rain in that week. If those were the tracks from his car, they were put there that day. You're wanting to accuse him, and it's hard not to do that because we didn't want to make him mad and make him want to leave.
Did you ever go by the crime scene?
Afterwards, no. I don't have a desire to see a murder scene. I don't have a desire of any of that. I mean, I've seen pictures on the internet of crime scenes like the Manson murders, the Black Dahlia murders. I'm like, that's grisly enough.
The Black Dahlia murders, what was that?
That was some actress way back, it was either 30s or the 40s.
Oh, really?
That they had killed her, cut her in half.
Really?
The autopsy photos are grisly.
Oh, really? You saw an autopsy photos?
Yeah. Oh, no, not autopsy, crime scene photo. Well, no, there is one of them with reports on the slab.
What I wanted to do was to kind of gauge his interest in the world of serial killers and trying to get a feel for who he was and how much of a suspect he was.
You know what was one that kind of fascinated me was the Dahmer thing.
Oh, Jeffrey was fun.
Was he?
Wasn't he, though? I mean, how do you not... People disappearing left and right.
Have you seen some women messed up pretty bad on the internet?
No, quite a few.
Really? Any dismemberments like that? Can you tell me what?
They had this one gal on a stretcher that, I mean, I counted like about 12 parts. I mean, we're talking ankle, leg, pelvis, arm, elbow, hand, head, and then the guts just,
The more Sean talked, you could kind of sense the excitement that everybody was like, this has got to be our guy. He had been at the crime scene of one of our victims. He knew one of our victims personally. He enjoyed dismemberment, enjoyed viewing dismemberment.
I mean, it's fascinating to me.
That's too coincidental, so it's obvious to everybody this is the guy, this is big.
You need to talk to me about what's going on.
Nothing's going on other than I'm getting hungry and ready to go home and eat.
It never became accusatory. It became hinting that you got to be the guy. And it didn't because we didn't want to charge me or let me go.
If I were a guilty person, you'd probably have me cracked. Not a guilty person.
Probably have you cracked.
Cracked, just going, okay, I'll be right out soon.
His demeanor, I never felt like I developed the rapport that I needed to develop with him. We very firmly believe Sean is our guy, but we couldn't prove that. He just wasn't going to tell the truth. He wasn't going to confess.
I'm going to be right back, okay? All right?
There was a sense of pressure because at that point he was not under arrest. We felt like we needed to keep him there as long as possible until the DNA evidence comes back. I think Sean realized, that we were listening to the things he was saying, and so he made some statements.
Cut me loose or put me
He left Sean in there for quite an extended period of time while we waited on the results from the DNA swab. It was obvious he was becoming more agitated the longer he waited in the room by himself, but at this point, we're just trying to buy time.
How you doing? Hey. Got one thing to ask you. They're waiting on the judge right now, so it's going to be a few minutes. I want to know what you want for dinner. I'm going to go get you something to eat.
Y'all booking me?
No.
I want to go home. That's what I want to do. You said when this was over, when I've had enough, that we go home. Let's go home.
Do we let him go home or not? Do we have enough to keep him?
It's clear to me we have to let him go.
He's still a free person, and he's still a threat to everyone.
You have a guy that you believe is a serial killer. You're not going to take a chance of losing him.
We took him home, but he wasn't going to go past the damn end of the driveway because there was like friggin' 40 freaking cops there. I mean, he was not going to get out of our sight until we got that swab back.
Crime Lab was doing the DNA analysis, and we were waiting on a phone call from them.
It's always on your mind that maybe you do not have the right person, and the phone is going to ring, and maybe they tell you that we don't have a match, and we're back at square one.
Our surveillance team is in place, and we're sitting around waiting, and then around 10 p.m., we get the call from the crime lab. The results are in. We had obtained a voluntary DNA swab from Sean Gillis, and we brought him in for an interview. As soon as possible, we rushed that swab over to the State Police DNA lab.
I want to go home. That's what I want to do. You said when this was over, when I've had enough, that we go home. Let's go home.
At some point during the interview, Sean Gillis said, "I'm ready to go home." And he was not under arrest, so we brought him back home. At that point, the clock started ticking. They're working feverishly to try to come up with a match against our 3 victims. Around 10 p.m., we get the call from the crime lab. And it's him.
We're shifting gears now. We're writing out arrest warrants, and we called our SWAT team commander.
Our adrenaline's pumping.
Sean probably has a good idea that we are coming for him.
You know, we knew we wanted to get the SWAT team involved just because of the person that we were dealing with. We didn't know what he had in his residence. Did he have guns readily available?
They set off flashbangs. They knocked the doors down.
As soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard this explosion. And the bedroom door was kicked open. They grabbed Sean, put him in handcuffs, and he just looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." When I said, "I want to know what's going on now." And the police officer looked at me and he said, "You didn't know? You were living with a serial killer." And I just laughed and I said, "Boy, have you got the wrong house."
With Terry Lemoyne, her posture was that she had no idea that, little Sean did all this.
I said, "You just don't know." I said, "This is a child you just took out of here." That night, my whole life was turned upside down.
Even though we had the DNA evidence and we knew it was him, we wanted him to confess. We wanted him to tell us he did it. Nobody in law enforcement at the time thought that he was only responsible for 3 homicides. There's so many still unsolved, so we were trying really hard to tie him to other victims.
I've been doing this since 1978, and you're one of the best, if not the best I've ever seen.
He wanted respect. So A strategy was to play into what a masterful job he had done.
How did this come to be, man? Does the word monster come to mind? Pardon? Does the word monster come to mind?
He's towing the line, he just won't step across it. But he's just about to.
Tell me about this monster. 1 minute you're a person like you are, the next minute you're not. I think you're tired of this monster. I know you're tired of this monster. You want to see him?
We wanted to let him tell us how the monster can take over you and cause you to do these things.
What kind of tools did you bring with you for the monster bring?
One case it was a fishing knife. What case was that? Johnnie Mae? Got her hands up with a fishing knife?
How about Donna?
Pocket knife. What about Katherine? Bowie knife.
At first, Sean talked about the 3 women that we had linked him to by DNA evidence. That would be Katherine Hall, Johnnie Mae Williams, and Donna Bennett Johnston.
Donna had some type of on her neck or something. What would a like a strangulation type mark? What caused that?
Something that needs to be outlawed. Because it does make death by asphyxia so easy.
Had you developed that idea from something you saw or read, or?
No.
Is that true?
I just said, man, this thing would be lethal.
When you talk about murdering people and dismembering them, there is no coming back from that. There is no fix for that.
How did it get to a point, though, where you were able to get that around your neck? Demonstration? Okay, I'm not going to touch you. No, it's okay. Device in hand. Round. Okay.
He was very proud of the method he had developed to kill his victims. He told us unless they have a pair of scissors or a knife, it's over.
He enjoyed demonstrating how he did it, even with sound effect.
Oops.
Anytime you have a person like this, having done the things that he's already confessed to and that we know that he did, there's no end of what he might have done.
There were others one day. Person like you are, the next minute you're not. I think you're tired of this monster. There were others one day. Just get it out, you know, it's over now. It's over.
Sean also confessed to killing Joyce Williams.
She's one of the few people who introduced herself with her real name. Joyce and I never did anything. We were out drinking, having a good time.
Sean Gillis confessed to additional murders.
Body most Write it down, Schmidt.
I was shocked because the Hardy Smith case, I mean, that was not on the radar here with Mr. Gillis.
When he said that, I was like, my God, here we go.
She was doing something stupid, jogging by herself in the mornings, great distances from her house. I'd seen her dozens of times before. And usually just home.
This time the monster couldn't just wait.
This time she wasn't going home.
Once he started talking, you couldn't make him shut up.
But then when I saw her, it became single-minded. Oh, and I mean, I had nothing against it.
Then he talked about killing a woman named Marilyn Nevels, who had been a Jane Doe.
After Hardy, who was it? I don't know her name. Little blonde hooker. I'm sure y'all found on the levee on the River Road.
Sean Gillis also confessed to killing a woman named Lillian Robinson.
Well, they couldn't.
Honestly, I wanted to see her femur. I don't know why, just kind of thinking back on it.
It was shocking. He offered every graphic detail you could ask for.
Some people carved messages into bodies. I just picked it up and smack, smack, smack until she quit fighting. And then it was like there was a part of this woman that would not die.
Sean talked to her so long that we had to bring him back to the sheriff's office. The next day, on April the 30th,
Another one to 20. Yeah, I had some friends of mine that
we wanted to get really specific details pertaining to each victim.
Let's go ahead and do Johnnie Mae.
It was very important for court matters.
Yeah, I'd cut off the hands. I think just to have a piece of her, literally.
If you would, take us through the circumstances around Joyce.
She had beautiful legs. One thing that I recalled about her. And I wanted to keep those long legs, huh?
Donna Bennett Johnston.
I don't know why I was in the mood, but when I left that night, I was strictly in a hunting mood.
My inner voice was saying, this is pretty surreal, but let him talk. You can't act repulsed or shocked. You don't want to get him off of his train of thought.
First victim was Brian. She was there, she aroused me. Period.
Sean described Ann Bryan's murder as his first, which happened in 1994. He confessed to 8 homicides, and he said, if there were more, I would tell you.
I count myself lucky that I did not become one of those women. Sean was the best actor I ever met. I would never, ever have thought that he could be the monster he turned out to be.
Man, he flew under the radar for a long time. I'm so glad we caught him when we did, or I think we would have a lot more victims in Baton Rouge.
I think it was very important that he confessed because he took responsibility for what he did.
It was relief that he admitted it. I hate talking about him.
It puts a little closure in our minds to knowing that we were going to get our day in court.
When I received the phone call that let us know that these cases basically were solved, I felt relief and also thinking, oh my gosh, I now have a serial killer to prosecute. This was a multi-victim case. There was no doubt to me that a person who has deliberately and without remorse killed should be eligible for the most severe of penalties. So we were seeking the death penalty for Sean Vincent Gillis.
Are you ready to get this trial underway? We'll see.
I went to the trial of Sean Gillis one day, but I never returned. I didn't want to hear any more of it.
When I walked in the courtroom and I first observed Sean Gillis, he looked so innocent and polite. I would have probably picked him up if he had his thumb out hitchhiking on the road, and it just made me think you just can't trust no one today, and you just can't judge them by looking at them.
We presented all of our evidence. The jury, in fact, very quickly came back and found Sean Vincent Gillis guilty of first-degree murder. We then proceeded to the sentencing hearing, and my boss's mouth, the district attorney, just dropped. We could not believe what had happened.
Let's get you up to speed on the murder trial for admitted serial killer Sean Vincent Gillis. Jury selection lasted 6 weeks.
We presented all of our evidence. The jury, in fact, very quickly came back and found Sean Vincent Gillis guilty of first-degree murder. We then proceeded to the sentencing hearing, and my boss's mouth, the district attorney, just dropped. We could not believe what had happened.
Serial killer Sean Gillis escaped the death penalty in Baton Rouge. Gillis got life because the jury deadlocked.
Deliberations went nearly 4 hours, but no unanimous verdict, which is required for the death penalty.
He would have been one of the most prolific serial killers in this country had he not been caught. He should be in the ground somewhere.
The hammer went down and it was over. I was angry. My brother was angry. Just wasn't what we were expecting.
For the prosecution, Gillis is a killer who they say got off easy.
It's just hard to think of a situation where somebody has killed women very brutally and that would not be an overweighing factor.
Either way, if they would have took his life, my mom wouldn't have been here anyway, so there's no win or lose situation out of this anyway. I hope he lived till he's 100 and suffer. I'm satisfied with that.
As far as I'm concerned, Sean is just someone that needs to be forgotten.
In the span of 10 years, Baton Rouge went through a really, really rough period. For someone to kill just basically for the sport of killing is very unusual.
For several of these cases, other than the confession that he gave, there was really no other evidence.
So his confession played a vital part of the successful prosecution.
Those victims and the survivors were entitled to the best that we could give as a part of this system, which is not perfect, but we gave them our best.
It was probably the biggest thing I worked in my career, now 35 years. It's something I'm real proud of.
He'll always be in my mind. The things that I've seen that he's done, I gave my best at making sure that he can't do this to anyone else.
I do miss my mother very much. It's not a day goes by that I don't think about her. She was my mom, you know, the one that taught me how to live life and love.
You always miss your mom. You know, she missed graduations and, you know, marriages and her grandchildren. She had a lot of years left that she missed out on. Then somebody took them away.
I appreciate everybody who had anything to do with solving this case. I really appreciate it, and I thank them. I missed my mom, but she's always with me. Everywhere I go, that's my angel.